Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 248 of the Tick Boot Camp podcast. The title of today's interview is The Lyme Resource, an interview with Gretel Adams. My name is Claire Dalton.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
We really enjoyed our opportunity to interview Gretel this morning while she was able to tell us her story about when she contracted chronic Lyme disease. Gretel is obviously a really hard worker with a good work ethic, and she owns a flower farm. And when she got sick with chronic Lyme disease, that limited a lot of her abilities to run her farm. But she obviously didn't let it stop her. And she powered through all of the hardships that were in front of her and her suffering and her experiences with doctors. And we are so excited to be able to share her interview with all of you today. All right, welcome, Gretel. We are so happy to have you on the Tick Boot Camp podcast. And we're just going to jump right in and get started. And I want to know all about you to start. Tell me about your background. Where do you live? Where are you from?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name is Gretel Adams. I'm 36 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio. My husband, Steve, and I own a flower farm where we grow cut flowers that we sell to florists in Columbus, Ohio. So we have 20 acres in production, but we're inside the city limits. So we kind of say it's our piece of the country in the city. Yeah, so as far as the farm goes, right now we've built it up. We have about 20 employees, sell mostly to florists. And yeah, I mean, growing up, I grew up in a country suburb of Columbus, Pataskala in Ohio. And my grandmother is from the Philippines, so I am a quarter Filipino, even though I don't look like it because I look like my dad. But that has been also a part of some of my learning about Lyme, since I am mixed. So as far as growing up, I mean, I grew up in the country, in the woods. I grew up going to camp also. So ticks have been in my awareness, from the time I was a kid. Yeah, I think, or there's other specific questions you had about, yeah, my husband and I don't have any kids. The business is our child. And yeah, things we like to do for fun, go see music. And, before we were farmers, we used to travel around to music festivals and stuff, but now we don't have time for that in the summer. So
That's so neat. So tell me a little bit about your tick knowledge. You said that, I mean, Ohio, according to my knowledge of Ohio, it's pretty much a tick state. So what is your knowledge that you had? What did you know before Lyme disease, what you can do to protect yourself from ticks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, growing up, going to camp was, you wear long sleeves and pants and a hat, and you check yourself when you come home. I mean, we knew it was something that you needed to be aware of. I don't know if I knew kind of what the sickness meant before I was sick. But I think that's why I was able to identify this tick is attached enough, I need to deal with it. And then when the bullseye started to develop, 10 days later after I knew I had a tick, it was something I knew that needed addressed, because because of my experience of being at camp and then being a farmer. There's days where you're protected from the sun and you're fully covered, and there's days where it's over 90 degrees and that's pretty unbearable. And so it's there's kind of a balance of sometimes you're protected and sometimes you're not, just based on the the work that you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so neat that you are a flower farmer. That's so unique. And I looked at some of your pictures and they're absolutely beautiful. I love your flowers that you grow. How long have you been in business as a flower farmer?
This is year 16 for us. So we started farming when we were young. I was a social worker before. My degree's in psychology. And I was a social worker before. So we always kind of say farming found us. So my mom makes a joke because I used to hate mowing the lawn, and she's like, I can't believe you're a farmer. You used to like hate mowing the lawn. I'm like, I still don't mow the lawn. That's not like what makes me money. So yeah, so flowers kind of found us. I mean, the farmer we worked for the first year was a flower farmer and had been through like had an orchard and pick your own pumpkins and strawberries and grew vegetables, and so had landed on being a flower farmer. So that's kind of how we started with flowers. Our idea was to sort of live off of the land. So we had pigs, ducks, chickens, we grew vegetables. I made soap, we canned stuff, like did everything. And then as the business grew, the focus narrowed, and now just cut flowers to florists. We make bouquets for grocery stores. We have a farm stand here on the farm. So, the business has evolved over the years. We used to do farmers markets, we used to do weddings. And as it's grown, we've been able to kind of focus what we do, which has been nice to feel like you don't have to do everything.
Yeah, that is so neat. And it's so similar to my family. We started out with just a hobby farm with some goats, and now we have like every animal under the sun. And I'm like, now maybe we should be flower farmers. That's so neat.
Yeah, the industry is growing right now. There's a lot of new folks getting into it. Yeah. In the 90s, this is a tangent, but in the 90s, our government subsidized coca farms to become flower farms and kind of killed the domestic flower industry. So a lot of flower farms in the US went out of business at that point in time. So the industry is sort of rebuilding now with the awareness of people thinking about, local food and just sort of thinking about where stuff is coming from. Local flowers over the past, few years, or in our farming career, the demand has really grown, and actually with COVID times have become even more important because imports are harder to get in. So it's been cool to kind of see the industry grow.
That is so neat. So obviously you were in business before you got Lyme disease. So tell me about like your dreams, your goals, like what were you trying to pursue with your farm prior to Lyme disease?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we never really knew that the farm would be what it is today. That's what people are like. We're on like the on the larger side of small, or on the small side of medium, I guess, in the whole like scheme of things with flower farming. But there's a lot of farmers that are kind of more just like a couple acres. And so sometimes people are like, how did it get to the size that it is right now, the farm? And I like to work hard, and my husband's futuristic and has big dreams. And so that sort of grew it to what it is today. So our goal with the farm is just to spread the joy of flowers, one, but two, also to like provide a living for our employees. So, it's been about not just us for a long time. And a lot of times on farms, people aren't paid very well. So our goal with the farm, I was told in the beginning, basically, I was going to school to be a high school English teacher. I was told to keep my day job, that there's no way that as a couple, we could both work on the farm full time and like have a successful business. And so I think those naysayers were kind of like what drove the farm to like what it is today, to like show people and to show like our generation, like it is possible to like be a farmer, and like that this is like a path that is, sustainable for a career, and to like, and to have other people. So for us, it's kind of about the employees and knowing that we're like kind of providing a living for them. And so I'm grateful that the business was where it was when I got sick, because we did have a team that was able to like absorb some of the things that I could no longer do. And I think that when you're a farmer, part of it is just like pushing through, like if rain's coming, it doesn't matter if you're tired or it's the end of the day, you have to like finish planting. And so I think that that mentality has served me, but also been hard to like differentiate from, where you're like, what level of like pushing myself is healthy versus not, once I got sick, you know.
Mhm.
um but yeah, that's kind of, so I guess the goal would just be to like, I guess, be an example of like a sustainable like farming business, and not just sustainable like in our growing practices, but like sustainable in that like it is a business that can provide for the people who work for us, to give back. It's, everybody works hard, so we want to like be able to give back to them, you know, what they're giving to us.
Yeah, for sure. That's fantastic. I love your work ethic. I love fighting against the naysayers. Good for you. That's fantastic.
Thanks.
All right. So tell me about when your symptoms started to develop. What happened? What did you do?
Yeah. So I was 33. It was May. So for us, Mother's Day is our biggest like floral holiday that we can hit in our flower season. So we had just like made it through Mother's Day. It was a night that Steve and I were supposed to pick peonies. So peonies are something, if it's hot, they blow up and they need picked when it's like not actual work hours. But we went out to dinner instead, and then a storm happened, and so I still had my skirt on from dinner, and we took a walk through the peonies to kind of see if there was any damage from the storm. That night I found a tick on me when I went to sleep, so I knew that it was like attached enough that I needed to like deal with it. And so I got up and took the tick off, and like I said, grew up going to camp, so hadn't really like, I knew to like be aware of it, but it didn't really freak me out, I guess, at that point. 10 days later, I started to get the bullseye rash. The tick bite kind of itched like a mosquito bite, which I thought was weird because it didn't usually, it didn't usually kind of have like residual or whatever. So 10 days later, I had the bullseye. I called my doctor. This was on a Wednesday. And she said, I can't get you in until Monday. You should be fine. But if you start to feel worse, go to the ER. So by day 13, like by that Friday, I was at the urgent care, because I was in the field and the sun like was making me weak, and I could just sort of feel toxins like in my fingers were tingly, and I could feel toxins like flowing through me, and I knew like something wasn't right. So I went to urgent care. He immediately like saw the bullseye and was like, yeah, it's Lyme. Here's 10 days of doxy. You need to go to your regular doctor. So I went to my like primary care physician and let her know what was going on. She gave me up to day 21. So, 11 more days basically of antibiotics. And at the end of that, I was not okay. So I had a farmer friend who had an experience with Lyme, and he suggested that you suggested some resources for me. So I had been doing some research before we went back into the doctor at that point. And so she said, that she looked up and the CDC said that after that I should be fine. And there's no way that I could be experiencing the symptoms that I was. And we sort of had to just deal with what remains is what she said. And my husband was like, that's not an acceptable answer. Like, she's not okay. I mean, at that point, I couldn't, like, word recall was not like, that's why he had to go with me, because like I didn't have the words to really like advocate for myself. I couldn't really look at a screen. My head would like physically hurt. The ringing in my ears sort of felt like a force field around my head. And I couldn't like walk out in the field. So, for us, it was something, our most enjoyable time is after work, you have a beer and you walk through the field and you kind of brainstorm about, what needs done, prioritizing and like that kind of stuff. And that's kind of where our best like ideas come from. And I wasn't able to do that. I would walk to one end of the field, and my husband would have to like pick me up in the truck and take me to the next field over for me to be able to walk down that field. Yeah, so it was really intense at that point. I mean, I would wake up, make the list for the crew of what I knew needed to happen, see them off in the morning, go check in with the office, and then sleep until after lunch, and then come out and kind of check in again. That sort of went on for like 6 months, from like May through September. Okay, so go back, day 21, go back to the doctor. She says she can't do anything else. She ends up saying like, I'll give you until day 30 if that'll make you happy, like before we leave, just because that was, you know, we were trying to like share with her resources and whatever. And she had contacted the infectious like disease person, and so we get through day 30 and she's like, you know, kind of refuses to do anything else. And so at that point, that's when I post to social media and just like say, hey, this is what's going on. Like, you know, I have Lyme and I'm not able to access anything. You know, having a social work background, I think part of I like to like gather resources and like have information and like be able to share that with people. And so there were multiple people that reached out to me that either had Lyme themselves, that commented, you know, on my stuff and were willing to like talk to me, or like friends of friends, you know, and I was like just really touched by people who were complete strangers who would like share with me their whole life story. And I think hearing them talk about like symptoms and just acknowledging it was like, okay, like I'm not alone in this, and I'm not like crazy and wanting to like advocate for myself to have more care. And so I learned about a doctor here in Columbus, but it took me a couple months to like get in with him.
While you were waiting to get in with him, were your symptoms getting progressively worse at this time?
Yeah, because like it got to a point where I was having episodes where I was having like tremors, and yeah, like heart palpitations and like anxiety attacks and stuff like that. Yeah, but I knew that the you know, the doctor appointment was coming and that he was a Lyme guy. But at that point I had called around. I mean, I thought that I was going to have to go somewhere. We have farmer friends in different places, so people were like, you can come stay with us in Georgia, or you can come stay with us in DC or whatever. And just the thought of like not being home and not being with my husband like for support was a lot. And I knew if I could do it here, I would rather do it here first, to kind of exhaust the resources I have to be able to sleep in my own bed before I do that. So I got in with the doctor, but he did the IGeneX test. So that was the first time I was actually tested, and found that I had 3 rings. And he said, you know, you would be negative at a standard doctor because you have to have 5, but these 3 are pretty significant. So then he does the testing that he did was called a Meridian stress assessment, where they like hold a metal rod in one hand, and then they use another metal rod to sort of touch your reflexology points and then read the frequencies. And yeah, when I was like explaining this to like my mom and other people, it was like, I know that it sounds like really woo woo, but it's like at this point, I don't care. Like I'm willing to do anything to figure out what's going on and like move forward with my healing. And so at that point, we discovered that I had Epstein-Barr, I had Babesia, I get cold sores. So like the herpes virus was high. I also had heavy metal toxicities and an amoeba so we have well water here. And I think that's also maybe where some of the heavy metal toxins were coming in. We don't use fertilizers and pesticides and stuff that would have heavy metals that would be in the water table, but there is agriculture around us, and our well is pretty shallow. Our water table is really high around here, so it's only about 25 feet. So it's not, the water isn't very filtered. There's a lot of like minerals and stuff in it. So so from that point, once we got that diagnosis, this was in late August, so early September, I started taking medication. I forget what it was called, but like an anti-malarial medication for babesia, and so in September, you know, everything, you always get worse before you get better, but so I had a really intense like couple weeks where my body literally felt like it was trying to like squeeze something out, like I was having like muscle, like my muscles would like contract and then sort of release, and I would have these like episodes where it was like, it literally felt like my body was trying to like wring something out of it. And I think that was, you know, finally getting rid of the babesia, like with the anti-parasitic stuff. And I think that that's why I wasn't healing in the beginning, was because that wasn't being treated, you know. So from about May through September, which is a pretty important time in a farm season, you know, I was not able to really do anything. I mean, like I said, I wake up and, you know, help plan and stuff like that. So I was still like engaged, but my husband was like, you know, Emily, our manager, he's like, Emily and I are making decisions that you'd usually be a part of. And I was like, well, you have to, like, I literally don't have the capacity to be able to like be involved with all of this decision making. Like I couldn't look at an Excel spreadsheet. So like, you know, a lot of my roles on the farm are like the planning and ordering and inventorying. Like I do a lot of work like, you know, in Excel and kind of on the computer to sort of like make all the harvesting and stuff happen. But yeah, so September, I finally started to like have a bit of like a breakthrough where it was like, oh, okay, like I can, you know, I could walk in the field again. Yeah, typically for us, frost happens like the middle of October. And so that means like the end of the outdoor flowers. And I just remember it was, you know, the end of September. So we only had like a couple weeks left, and just being like so sad and like not ready. You know, I'd spend as much time out in the field as I possibly could, just because I was just like not ready. I felt like I hadn't like been involved for that whole season pretty much. And yeah, I think just like learning to communicate with the team about like what was actually going on with me, since it is like invisible, you know. And yeah, communicating with my husband. We joke now and say like, you know, we've got practice for when we get old, of like how to take care of each other and like communicate better about it. I mean, we're still learning, but I remember one of my very first Lyme friends that talked to me, you know, talking about the effect that it had on her relationship, and saying like, you know, if you can learn to communicate, whether that means you need to go to therapy or whatever, like that's the most important part. And I think that having a business together and having had already having to learn, you know, some of that already, this was on a completely like different level though, you know. I think because I was always, you know, I was raised to push through. I was not allowed to not go to school if I didn't feel good, you know, like so it was a part of my upbringing to push through. And then being a farmer, you know, part of that, like pushing through. And so really seeing that, like, if I did that, I would experience a crash, and like being real with myself about what my limitations should be. And once I started to feel better too, I also like, sometimes you get caught up in the adrenaline of like actually being able to do something, where I'm like, or Steve would be like, you shouldn't be out there lifting those crates. And I'm like, yeah, but the fact that like I can actually do this right now is like feels so good that, sometimes you ride that adrenaline rush and then you end up having a crash at the end. But I think that the Lyme battle for me has been just as much mental as it has been physical. I think being someone who your identity is what you do physically with your body, and then not being able to do that thing, there was a lot of, I had an identity crisis. Basically, it was just like, well, who am I if I'm not a farmer, if I can't actively be a partner like in the business, or I felt like I wasn't contributing to like my marriage. It's like, if I'm not like a wife and a partner and a farmer or whatever, like what am I? And sort of having to like redefine what it meant to be me, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I think a lot of Lyme disease people relate to that. So just before I pass the mic over to Matt here to ask you some questions, I just want to go back just a little bit. So while you were going through this process, how many doctors did you end up going to throughout this process?
Well, there was the urgent care doctor that diagnosed me, my regular doctor that wouldn't do anything, and then my first Lyme doctor. I'm now on my second Lyme doctor. So I guess I've seen 4. I mean, my physician did like contact the infectious disease doctor, but I didn't see him personally. So I'm grateful that I like found the Lyme community and was able to connect with a Lyme literate doctor pretty early in my journey. But that still doesn't mean it was easy. Like, even though I had the bullseye, and that's something that like, I listen to the podcast and hear everyone's stories, and it's like, I am grateful that I knew I had a tick and that I had a bullseye. Like, there was a defining moment that was kind of like, that identified like the acute episode. And but now that I like I've heard Matt say on the podcast, like it being like a collection of things that have happened. And I remember having a tick one of the times when I was at camp that was in my ear, and so nobody saw it until my mom came to pick me up like on the weekend. So it was like, who knows like how long it was there and like was engorged. And you sort of think back about these things. We went to Puerto Rico probably 5 years ago, and our mosquito net wasn't closed, and when I got back I had vertigo for a month that was never like diagnosed. And and then I also had unidentified stomach issues where we were testing for thyroid, and that's not what it was, and had no answers at that point. So it's like I did have this acute episode that I knew was what was the beginning of my discovery about it. But it is kind of like looking back, like who knows if some of those other things like were a part of either what made my body vulnerable enough at that point to like suffer such a severe infection, or now knowing what I know, with my second Lyme doctor, we've done a lot more testing, and have found like Q fever and dengue fever and 2 different kinds of pneumonia and like mycoplasma and all of these things that she's saying, like she's seeing old antibodies and new, which means at some point in my life I had those before and they've been reactivated. So it's like, I don't remember having mono when I was a kid, but potentially I had what we thought was the flu and it was just like never diagnosed, or like who knows. So it's like now knowing what I know about how things continue to live in your body, it's like I don't, who knows if there was a point before this where Lyme was a part of it. I don't have that answer.
Yeah, that is so relatable. Me and my mom are always thinking back and like when did this really start? When did it really start? And I think a lot of Lyme disease people do that. I just want to ask one more question. You talked about Meridian stress assessment and that you went and had that done. I think it would be very good for our viewers to know, like, where did you go to have that done? That's a huge part of my healing journey is Meridian stress assessment. But for me in Utah, it was really hard to find someone that would do that. Like we basically heard about it from someone that was like a doctor that was like traveling like to Utah that wasn't even from Utah. So like which doctor, was it Lyme literate, a holistic doctor? Where did you go to get that done?
So I saw Dr. Larry Everhart. He's in Powell, Ohio. And he was originally, just a primary care physician, just a general practitioner. And 20 years ago, his wife got Lyme. And so this was something that he heard about in their research. And he said, at that point in time, everybody, this doctor who did that test, everybody talked about how he was crazy, but all of his patients were getting better. And so he started doing that in his practice, basically to heal his wife, was like how it started. Yeah. So, and I think, we learned a lot, I think. And I know people who have seen him and, felt healed when they were finished or, in remission. He was continuing. I had been on antibiotics for over a year, and he was kind of continuing for that to be the method. And my body was sort of feeling like it needed a break. So, I wanted to try something more herbal, and my gut, I was having issues. I had an IUD. So this is another thing that I think maybe isn't talked about very much in the Lyme community. People talk about like metal in your body or whatever, but I had an IUD and I was having really bad like yeast infections from being on antibiotics. And no one could really, Dr. Everhart didn't really want to talk about kind of like female issues. Or I just wasn't comfortable talking with him about it. I'm not really sure. And I was kind of like in between doctors with the OBGYN. So like I went to Planned Parenthood and they diagnosed it, but then my regular OBGYN was like, well, that's not what we're seeing. And so I was taking diflucan and kind of like trying to fight it. And so I got my IUD removed, and found out that it was actually bacterial infections that was happening and not necessarily yeast infections. And so I think that's why like the diflucan wasn't really helping as much as they thought it was going to. But I had a copper IUD, getting the IUD out like made a huge difference. And so I wanted to sort of have like a period where it was just like cleansing myself and not being on antibiotics. And so that's when I switched doctors, because I found out about another doctor who was in Ohio, and somebody said, I heard when you go in her house, you have to take off your shoes and it's all about like energy, and people call her the witch doctor. And it was like, okay, that's where I want to go. So, and I had heard about a couple people who had seen her who felt like they were healed afterwards. And so I started with Dr. B in January of last year, and also started hyperbaric oxygen treatments. And so we started with ozone, and I was trying to do ozone actually so we have Fridays off in the winter. So I was trying to like do my ozone treatment on Thursdays and have Friday, Saturday, Sunday to kind of like heal and then be ready for work on Monday. And that wasn't really happening. It was too intense and it wasn't enough healing time. And I wasn't really feeling that sort of like feeling better after feeling worse that I had experienced with other stuff with Lyme. And so we decided to go with the oxygen treatments. So it kind of like went herbal and went to the oxygen treatments at the same time. Did mold remediation in my house. We got water filters for the shower and a new reverse osmosis system, like for drinking water, just trying to really like, winter is my time, being a farmer cyclically, winter is my time to sort of focus on healing more. So I was doing the oxygen treatments, but it was 4 days a week and took 3 hours because it was like 90 minutes at the deep dive or whatever, that pressure. And it takes a long time to get up to that pressure for manage your eardrums. And then I was doing sauna afterwards, and I could feel things releasing, like in the sauna. There'd be times where I was like breaking down, like just crying in the sauna, and I could just like feel things releasing that I had been holding on to for a very long time. I think the mold remediation helped as well. We live in a house that was built in 1928, and when additions were made to the house, airflow I don't think was considered. So the basement had mold and the attic had mold. So I was doing that for a while, and then the farm season hit. So I quit doing the oxygen treatments. We did all the tests where we found that I had Q fever and dengue fever and, all of those things that I sort of listed off. So went back on to antibiotics at that point. It still have, a big herbal protocol. And this winter, I decided to focus on the mental health part of my healing. So I think that, I've listened to podcasts and just other resources where people talk about that being an essential piece of the puzzle. And so that's where I'm at right now. So on antibiotics, still doing lots of herbal supplements. The detox stuff is the hardest for me, just because it has to be on empty stomach, and it's hard to like figure out how to fit that into your life sometimes. So we did buy a sauna for our house, which has been really nice, and I have to pay to go somewhere, like an infrared. So this winter I've been doing the infrared sauna, and my husband and I are in couples therapy, and I'm also in like personal therapy, and that has been really helpful also. So I mean, there's been a lot of things like in the journey. I feel like everyone's story that I've heard, that I've listened to the podcast, it's like pieces of a puzzle that are going together to figure out what works for you. Like there's no like silver bullet answer. So still in the discovery process and trying to figure all that out.
Gretel, I have so many follow-up questions with you and
Yeah.
Claire. I mean, it was brilliant. You gave us so much good information, but I want to follow up on a few of those items. So, this whole mental health component and the emotional component, you really talked about in great detail. And thank you for being so open and honest and vulnerable with us about that, because I know it can be a hard thing to share. But you did mention that Lyme disease is as much mental as it is physical, you said earlier. Then you said when you were doing the sauna, you had this emotional release. So, what are your thoughts about the emotional complications to healing? Because we've heard people tell us that if you don't address your emotions, and if you can't feel your emotions and you can't express your emotions, it's going to inhibit healing. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and there are things like I didn't even know that these things were stored inside of me still. It's like sometimes I feel something release that I'm like, whoa, that's been there like my whole life, or like I've never felt this kind of like openness in my chest before or whatever. And so it's been really interesting for me. It's like now that I have the body awareness that I've gained through being sick with Lyme, I can feel the difference physically in the like mental health stuff that I've been working on. You kind of like you take trauma that has happened to you, and you're just like, okay, I'll like store that there in my body. I'll compartmentalize this situation and hold it in the back of my shoulder or in my neck or in my chest, or wherever it is that you hold those things. So like part of the work that I've been doing with my therapist is like, when you feel something, like actually like doing a body scan and like figuring out like where it is in your body that you're feeling that. So something that I've learned is that I I bottle my emotions up. I'm pretty like neutral, in the face of crisis or whatever, like I'm pretty neutral. And that's because like I'm holding it all inside. And so for me, a lot of my stress and trauma is, held in my chest and in my throat and like kind of in the back of my neck, with Lyme also with the back of your neck, like you hold things there, the bacteria and stuff. So lymphatic drainage massage and cupping have also been like an essential part of that to like actually try to get some of those, going through the mental health part of it, going through the therapy to like release and then using the sauna and like lymphatic drainage massage and cupping to sort of like help sort of get those things out that you've just released from your body.
So, Gretel, do you think that it's a crossover or a mix or a blend of physical and emotional, meaning that your emotions are causing you to have real physical things? Because we hear from many people that they have real problems, inflammation in specific parts of their body, or they have, they constantly get herniated discs in their back. Do you think that those physical presentations are possibly a result of emotions that are being stored up? And we know when we get emotional or if we bottle up our emotions, we can get tense and we do things physically that can then trigger those types of things. So I think they're so interwoven, those two things. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that it's really just purely emotions and mental health, or do you think that there's a physical overlap or cause and effect scenario there as well?
Yeah, I think they're very intertwined. I think that one, and that's why this winter I chose to focus on the mental health piece, is because I knew gratitude and mindset are the antidote, but it's like, it's easy to hear that and not feel it. It's like, you can say that, but you have to like believe in yourself and like trust yourself. I don't know. I'm still in the process of working through like all of that. So I feel like it's pretty new, but these are just things that I've been working on of like, yeah, it's not, the mindset switch is not just like, you can't just like snap your fingers and that's like what you believe, you've got to like work towards trusting yourself.
So, Gretel, I know I'm kind of giving us a spoiler alert here, but I know you're over 70% recovered today. But I want to focus on, you were really sick and you've made some major progress here. And you did talk to us about the struggle that your health had on your marriage and your relationship. And you mentioned that you're in couples therapy, that you're going to therapy for yourself personally. What other things have you done? And you also talked about communication as well being an important part of maintaining a healthy marriage. But what other things have you done? Because we constantly get this question, Gretel, and it varies in the way it's presented, but it's always, I'm not worthy of a relationship, or my boyfriend/girlfriend is leaving me, or I'm in a marriage and I'm close to divorce because this illness has ruined our marriage. But yet you've been able to overcome that. So how have you been able to do that? What tips and advice can you give people that are listening that are really struggling to maintain either intimate relationships or marriages as a result of their chronic Lyme disease?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't know if I really have the answers. I mean, I'm grateful that my husband is so supportive. I think that, yeah, I mean, there are definitely times where it would be, I would feel my sickest, and that's when we would argue the hardest, to be honest with you, is because like I didn't know how to communicate that that's what I was feeling. And I felt a lot of guilt and shame about not being able to be in the relationship as I was before, which would lead to me getting defensive. And yeah, there were definitely some big fights in the process. And there were times where I would say, which I was wrong, but I would say, sometimes I think it'd be easier if I was single. And it's like, I had COVID. I went through isolation where I was literally by myself for 10 days, like in a different house, and felt terrible and had nobody there. And that showed me like, I didn't want to be by myself. I learned, it gave me an appreciation of, yeah, of him being there through the hard times. And I think honestly the business is kind of what helped like hold it together, because it was like, we have to, this is our livelihood and other people depend on us, and so we have to like learn how to communicate to get through this, to like hold it together. Yeah, I think that my husband had also been previously through therapy, and so was open to talking about stuff. He's actually way better at talking about feelings and stuff than I am. So I think that he helped kind of bring some of that out in me, and also learned to kind of give me space sometimes when I needed it. So there would be, I've been doing like CBD Epsom salt soaks. I decided I'm not calling them a bath, because I'm not in there to like bathe and like it's enjoyable. It's like an actual like medical, like my body hurts and I need to like soak in Epsom salt. So
That's brilliant, by the way. I love that.
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah. So yeah, I, like he would give me space and go out to the barn and hang out by himself and sort of like let me have, because our house is small, so like sort of let me have the house. Or yeah, there'd be times where I'd say to him, like I feel like I need to just like be in a room with no other stimulus and just kind of feel my feelings, because like so much of my day was just kind of not really acknowledging how I was feeling and kind of powering through. And then I'd get to like time to go to sleep, and then I wouldn't be able to sleep because you'd be processing everything that happened during the day, and just like how your body actually felt and what you did that was too much and what you should have done differently and all of that. And so like, yeah, sort of giving me time to just like lay in a dark room by myself and cry it out. I don't know. And
well, I do want to push you a little bit, Gretel, on this, because I don't think you're being fair to yourself on this. We've interviewed so many people who've had a common interest, like a business, to stay together and overcome their illness, and yet their marriage has failed and they're no longer together because they unfortunately were not able to overcome the challenges due to chronic Lyme disease. So I think that there's more here, and you're kind of being a little humble about it. And I want to just get your thoughts on it. I mean, look, you were in therapy, you were in couples therapy, your husband had gone to therapy in the past, you were open to these techniques. You're communicating with your husband what your needs are. I need to be left alone. I can't be stimulated, and you need to give me my space. Your husband is learning and growing with you, and your constant communication and growth emotionally has allowed you to probably have a stronger relationship. And yes, there probably were hard times when you were, and look, you're human, you're sick. If you're saying things you regret, that's life, right? Where nobody's perfect. But I think you need to reflect back on what happened and realize how strong you are and your husband is to get through this, because not many couples can get through a chronic Lyme disease journey. And I think that it's much more than just your business that held you guys together throughout all this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah. I mean, I think that him being supportive and just like, now that I look back, now that we're like reflecting, you're like, wow, like that really was. And I think when you're sick too, and he's like, this is hard for me too. And you're like it's, it's hard to see each other's perspectives of like how it could be harder for him than it is for me when I'm the one like experiencing the symptoms, but it is also like affecting his life. And, like I joke, but it's not really a joke, but like, I was sick. I was really sick for a year before COVID happened. And so I'm like, oh, I was already like living this lifestyle of like not going out and like not seeing people and not being able to do the things that I used to be able to do. And so we were like, well, me being sick with Lyme kind of like prepared us for COVID times, because we were already like living day by day and having to like take what we could and just be grateful for like what we could accomplish. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, I'm super grateful for him and the support that he gave me through the process. And yeah, I think that we're stronger now because of it. I think that, when people say, I think there's like a gushy where they're like, oh, we love each other more every day. And it's like, the reality of that is like, you've been through some really hard things and you've had to learn how, like, you've had to grow together in order to like make it through. And that's why like your relationship is stronger. it's like, it's not just like an ooey gooey, like, oh, we love each other more each day. It's like, we've learned a lot about each other through this process. And yeah, and so that's why like the relationship is stronger, is because then you take that into the next hard thing that you deal with and learn about, you know, how to work together. And you know, we've been together for a long time. I was 19 when I met him, so it was in 2005. So we've been together now for 16 years. And so you know, you either grow together or you grow apart, I think, when you meet somebody that young. And so I think the fact that we've already like been through that, you know, the farm, we were young when we started farming too. And so in the beginning, you know, I used to resent the farm for making me grow up. Now I'm grateful that the business is where it is today, so that it could, you know, absorb me being sick and needing my role to change and stuff. Yeah, so I think
Not
that
all
a
this,
lot of the
I'm so,
struggles that we've been through kind of in that way sort of helped like prepare us too.
yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt again, Gretel. I just, again, I don't think you're being fair enough to yourself. You're identifying circumstances which resulted in your successful relationship and business, and it wasn't the circumstances. It's you. It's your husband. It's the way you've communicated. It's the way you've been able to identify how to overcome these horrible obstacles put in front of you because of this disease. So yes, were some, you know, situations put out in your favor. Some, maybe you started your business early. Many other obstacles were thrown your way that nobody else has to experience. So I think, again, reflect on that. It's not just because you started your business early that you're successful today. You would have been successful today regardless of when you started your business, because of how you are and who you are and your drive, right? I mean, one of the things that I credit. Yeah, and again, I feel rude interrupting, but I just felt so passionate to tell you, like, you're not being fair to yourself. And you know, here we are. You know, you talking about, well, why are you successful in your marriage? This is a really important topic. So you told Claire earlier that you like to gather resources, and that as soon as you got sick and you were treated with antibiotics and you weren't better, the first thing you did is you contacted your farm friend who had experience with Lyme disease, and you said, give me all the resources you have so I can learn about this. And the more information and knowledge you arm yourself with, the better you are to communicate and figure out what you need to do to get better. And I think that helped your marriage as well. That helped you in your healing journey. So on that note, can you just share with us, do you recall some of the resources that your friend shared with you? What were they? Websites? Were they books? Were they blogs? Were they studies? Were they doctors? What kind of resources were shared with you early on that helped you gain all this knowledge to move forward and continue to heal, despite your doctor telling you, according to the CDC, you're healed, and I don't believe that you're still sick, which is ridiculous?
Yeah. There was a movie, now I forget what it was called, Under My Skin, that was suggested to me. That was also like very terrifying at the time, because I had only been sick for, you know, a couple of weeks, and I was just like, so now when I like refer that to people, I'm like, make sure you watch part 2, because that's like where like the successes happen, and you're like, oh, okay, like I can like heal from this, because it's kind of scary in the beginning to just, I think, to learn that you need to be your own advocate, and that doctors don't know everything, you know, was a big like learning thing for me. And also to learn like how political or, you know, bureaucratic, like just like trying to get access to care was. I wasn't really prepared for that. When I got sick, I had no idea that it was like that. And so I think that's why my friend Steve and Mandy from Three Porch Farm, they had both experienced it. And I remember his first email to me was sent like double spaced, and it said like, I know that reading from a screen can be hard for Lyme people, you know, and so that's why. And that was like, even that little thing where you're just like, oh wow, like he totally gets it, like, because even the email with the resources that he sent to me was double spaced. So yeah, watching Under My Skin was the first thing that I did. Dr. Stephen Phillips and Dana Parrish like had some YouTube videos, so watching those things, and I think just like hearing people's stories. So that's how I found my friend Deanna, is how I found Dr. Everhart. She had done hyperbaric, and so that's how I found that like resource, doing the ozone and stuff. She had tried this like this brain pill that was basically like cow brain. And so the idea was like, you know, you ingest something healthy of that organ, of the thing that's bothering you the most. I mean, Deanna was kind of my like guiding light. She would send me things in the mail, like, you know, things that I should try, or if I was having a lot of inflammation and really high pain, and didn't have a doctor at that point. So she sent me, was it naltrexone, I think, that you take at a low dose to like help with inflammation. And so it was like, when I didn't have a doctor, I mean, just I think having a shoulder to cry on too was like a huge part of just, and that's what Deanna was for me. She was just like, call anytime, like, even if it's just to like, you know, just because you need somebody or whatever. And again, I didn't know her. It was just, I posted on social media and she responded on Instagram, and that's how we met. And yeah, I think that in the beginning conversations that I had with Lyme people, the biggest like takeaways for me, I talked to a girl who was in her young 20s and, you know, had been sick. She got sick when she was a teenager, and she said to me that you can either pause your life completely and give yourself 100% to your healing, or you can do what you can and know that it's going to take longer, because it may take longer to heal, but your life is still intact at the end. And I think for me, I like needed to hear at that point, you know, I was like, do I need to go away and like be in some kind of inpatient like treatment or whatever? And so it was just like hearing, she was so like young at that point and had dealt with Lyme at so young, and but like that like statement was so wise, of just like, you know, kind of figuring out what the balance is of like how much, because I knew I couldn't just like, well, Lyme can be a life interrupter. And I had talked to people before who were like, yeah, I had to quit my job and move home. And yeah, just trying to figure out like what level of that worked for me. So I feel like that piece of advice was like, was something that helped like guide me. And also the lady who told me, you know, that her relationship suffered because of it. I think just like having that awareness of like, I knew that I didn't want that to be the result of my illness, you know, and so really like putting focus on that. Yeah, I got Dr. Buhner's like herbal book. I was suggested to an herbalist. I did some muscle testing. That's how I found out that my diet should be different. So I'm still not the best at it, but dairy, gluten, soy, and sugar are, I say gluten light, so I'm not, it's not totally, but you know, learning that stuff through muscle testing and the metal toxicity. So yeah, I feel like there's been lots of little pieces of advice that have sort of come kind of at the right time, where you're just like, oh, I'm ready for the next thing. And you know, Deanna was always when I asked her, you know, I think I'm ready to like switch doctors, and she's like, if that's what your body is telling you, you know, just always being reinforced that it's like, you are the one who knows, like you are the one who knows what your body needs. And so I think having that support from her, having been through the experience, was really important. Yeah, and I think, and then I, you know, posting on social media, whenever I post and talk about it, it's other people reach out, and I like to gather resources. And so if someone says, you know, I'm a Lyme warrior too, or whatever, then I'm like, please like DM me your story, because I would love to like hear more, and if there are resources. So yeah, I'm still open to suggestions, and I'm willing to like try things if people say that it's something that worked for them.
I think it's beautiful though how you've come full circle, and Claire's going to talk to you a little bit about this in a little bit, but how you were the one reaching out for support, and you had Deanna, you had this young woman, you had this other woman to talk to you about relationships, and how your journey was made a little bit easier because of them. And now today you're doing that for others. I mean, that's a really beautiful part of your story that we're going to get to in a little bit. And, you know, one of the things I do want to talk about is because that young woman who gave you that advice about you can let Lyme, you know, basically stop your life and interrupt your life, or and heal quicker, or continue your life and maybe prolong your treatment a little bit. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper because you did share with us earlier with Claire that you felt like Lyme took away your identity, and you had to redefine your identity. You were a farmer, you were a wife, right? You were all these things, and you felt like they were taken away from you, even when you were trying to persevere and do them anyway, based on this young woman's guidance to you. So do you think that you're going to be different regardless because of what you've been through, but you want to be able to maintain as much of you as possible? Just give us a little bit more about that, because I struggle with that concept of most of us when we're through this journey are better refined versions of ourselves, but it sounds like you were trying to grasp onto who you were and not lose that as well. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely letting go also, and knowing that I couldn't be out in the field harvesting all day, and knowing that I couldn't lift all the crates that I used to be able to lift, or you know, that an intense day might mean that I am going to crash afterwards, and just sort of like coming to a realization about that with myself, and sort of allowing myself the grace to like need more rest. And that's something I still struggle with now, because I want to be out there with the team doing the hard thing. I don't want to be just the one like managing and just like setting it up and walking away and being like, okay, you guys can let me know when you're done with this hard thing, you know? And so, yeah, there's definitely still times that I push through when I shouldn't, but it's like the team needs me. And yeah, I think recognizing that I still am all those things, even though I can't do the things that I used to be able to do. Like someone said, I mean, I found Lyme people on social media, and actually finding the like chronic illness sort of like community, I think is also what helped, like kind of, yeah, just like focusing on the things you can do instead of things that you can't. And I think that was a really big thing for me, of like recognizing like being grateful for the times that I can be out in the field and like doing something hard, instead of just when I'm in the office, like just being sad that I wasn't out there. And also recognizing that as part of the evolution of the farm too, you know, as the business grew, I'm going to be needed for more like decision making and planning and stuff like that. And other people, you know, our employees can do the harvesting, and sort of passing that on. So it all kind of happened at the same time. I think we were in the process of me not harvesting as much, or me not being in the field as much. Lyme sort of like forced that to happen quicker than we expected it to. But I think, yeah, having the support from my husband, and kind of like him saying, you know, that because I would say like, oh, I don't have the energy to like fulfill my wifely duties, like, you know, to cook. And I mean, that's not his opinion either, but just like feeling like I wasn't providing to the relationship or whatever. And him just like not I don't know, not loving me less because I couldn't do those things, like helped reinforce that it was like, okay, that who I was changing. I don't know.
No, and I think that's brilliant, because whether you're sick or not, you're going to change as you grow up, right? And I think, and as your business grows up, so as your business was growing, you probably would have changed your role in some way anyway, but because you were sick, you use that and adapt it. And you didn't want to lose the parts of your identity that were so important to you that you can still maintain, right? And so I get what you're saying in that regard. And I think that's a really important lesson, because sometimes I catch myself doing this, and especially in the past, I've caught myself doing this, where you use your illness as a crutch to not do things that you can do because, you're just thinking, I'm just too tired to even think about it. And you sort of lose who you are and who you can be and your potential because of your illness. So I totally get what you're saying there. So I do want to pivot back though. So just to kind of just put a high level over what you did to treat. So, I mean, you had 21 days of antibiotics and really did nothing for you. Then you waited a month. You went to this Lyme litter doctor for about, I think it was 2 years you treated with this Lyme litter doctor. And it was the BCA, which was the game changer for you. So it was the anti-malaria medication you said, right? Which really was, when you did that, you started to feel better and you started to feel things kind of getting activated and coming out of your system. And that was the first game changer in your healing, right?
Yeah.
But you did describe how when you started the BCA medication, you actually felt the toxins flowing through you. And that's a really powerful way to describe it. So can you explain to us what did that feel like, right? Because I think we've all felt odd sensations, things going on with our body with Lyme disease that we've never felt before Lyme. So how could you explain to our listeners what that was like when you actually felt the toxins flowing through you?
Like kind of like how your fingers, like if your arm fell asleep or whatever, that tingliness that is like as it's kind of waking back up, like that uncomfortable like tingliness. That's kind of what I was feeling. Yeah, and I think I am also like a writer, and so just trying to like put into words exactly what I was feeling. I think sometimes, my husband would be like, oh, that's like what it feels like, but he always like believed me. He never, when I told my aunt, I felt like there was a force field around my head. I think she was like, what? And people didn't fully like understand, or like it felt like in the beginning, it felt like I was stuck at the beginning of a bad trip, like, on like hallucinogens or something, like where it was just like uncomfortable. You didn't fully understand what was going on. Your body felt weird, but you didn't get to experience the fun part of it. It was like a bad trip. So like a lot of it was, I could refer back to my partying days, I guess.
But these are really powerful ways of describing how you feel. And I certainly can't put to words these feelings. And as you're saying these things, like the force field around your head, I'm like, wow, I know what you mean by that, right? So I think that's a skill that you have that I certainly don't, to express how we're feeling and help people understand a little bit where we're coming from. So I do want to, so then just kind of track your healing journey here, right? So now you're with Dr. Larry Everhart for about 2 years. And at that point you kind of plateaued. You made a lot of progress, but you plateaued and you decided to go to another doctor. And that was Dr. B you referred to them as, and is that Dr. Valeria Basil-Wicks? I'm probably mispronouncing her name.
Yeah, that's why we call her Dr. B. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. Yeah. It used to be Dr. Ritchie, and now she's Dr. Basil-Wick, I think is how you say it.
Basil-Wick. So with Dr. Basil-Wick, you went beyond just the babesia and the antibiotics, which you were on with Dr. Everhart, and you started to do things like more herbal therapies, ozone, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and even mold remediation, because you probably realized that mold exposure is a chronic immune suppressor and you needed to remediate that to allow yourself to heal, right? So did I miss anything, any key parts there that you did as far as treatments or, chronologically what you did in your healing journey?
Well, I talked about it a little bit, but the lymphatic drainage massage and like cupping. So we have a friend that worked on the farm and then became a massage therapist. And so she was learning about lymphatic stuff as she was practicing on me. And still now when I go in, she's like, oh, I learned this new thing, and we're willing to like try. But I think that was really helpful. When I took tests, I learned I had the MTHFR, the genetic, basically the genetic predisposition to not detox very well. And so the lymphatic drainage stuff helped with that. And in the beginning, we didn't know, not to press as hard like you would on a knot in a muscle. It just needs kind of like, it's not like you're digging into like a muscle knot. It's, more gentle stimulation. So and I was probably holding on to a lot of toxins, but in the beginning we would do that. And then I'd be in pain that night and I would herx. So just kind of learning what kind of what kind of stimulation the lymphatic system actually needed. And then the cupping. So the back of my neck would, I mean, still it will just be like a wrenching knot sometimes. And so like acupuncture and like massage and cupping. Now I'm seeing a chiropractor too. And that's been really helpful because it's been helpful with like we found it's the top vertebrae, the atlas vertebrae. So literally where your skull like meets the top of your neck is where the like inflammation is happening, which is part of the brain fog too, like actually inflammation in your head. And so there are times after I see the chiropractor that I will like have a herx afterwards, it must be releasing something in there. So I think that those things, just helping with the release of things, like have also been a big part of it.
And detox supports. Obviously, you mentioned the infrared sauna, the lymphatic massage, you were taking detox supplements, you mentioned, right? So on that note, do you recall any of the specific herbs that you've taken, and if any of them have been, a direct cause and effect of you feeling better as you took that particular herb or blend?
So right now I am taking something called Catacola Calm. It's from Designs for Health. I'm not sure exactly what is in it, but when I had seen an herbalist, and he knew that there was something wrong with my adrenal system. But what he gave me was actually like an adrenal like boost. And so like I wasn't sleeping at all. So this Catacola Calm is like, it helps calm down your adrenal system. And so I think that's been really helpful for me to have something. I was having a lot of anxiety and insomnia, and had asked my doctor, if I could do like an anti-anxiety medication or antidepressant or something like that. And this is what she suggested instead, to, because she was like, if you take that, that's also another like toxin, there are other side effects that could happen. And like, do you want to try this herbal thing first? And I did. And that has really helped. So I don't know what herbs are in it though.
But I think
some of the things that are by the name,
but you know what? You gave us a product and it helped you with anxiety and stress, right? So I think that's a really important tip there, that people can go look up that particular name and find that, that blend, and then see what's in it and possibly buy it because they may need that help. But so, here we are, right? I mean, we're a couple of years into this journey now. I guess what, 3.5 years or so, right, into this journey since your diagnosis, and you're about 70% better. You've done all of this great stuff. And Claire's going to talk to you about, where you're at today, what you're looking to do in the future. But before I hand it over to Claire, I would like you, if you're comfortable, to talk a little bit more about like hormones and things like that, because your adrenals control hormones. And we've learned, and we've interviewed some of the top doctors who tell us and have proven that Lyme and co-infections actually mess up your hormone, and they mess up your adrenals, and your cortisol receptors actually get damaged. So your body doesn't recognize that enough cortisol is being produced, and it's constantly spits out cortisol, which gives you that stress drug, right? So when you talk about things like your adrenals and your HPA balance, that's how people are able to to really balance out their hormones. But on that note, you did talk about things with you had an IUD in, which was causing you problems with heavy metals. You talked about you had I think it was a depot shot, right, as well, which caused a flare for your Lyme disease. And there are a lot of feminine related issues that Rich and I frankly just can't relate to or speak about on this podcast. And it sounds like you're very open to that. So if you're comfortable, is anything else that you're willing to share with, maybe have a discussion with Claire before she picks up on where you're at today, that can be helpful for our female listeners? I mean, we've identified, unfortunately, a large subset of the Lyme community suffers from endometriosis. We've identified that a lot of things like depot shots, we've had other guests tell us this, have been major flares for triggers. And this IUD piece is a new piece here as well. So if it's not too much information and it's not too personal, if you can share any tips you have in that area with Claire, and she'll pick that up with you.
Yeah. So I think that, saying 70% healed, I think I've been saying that for a couple years now. Like, something I've realized is like, you don't realize how sick you were until you start to feel better. And so there's times where you're like, that's why it's said, I think I'm 75% now, but then, once I start to feel better, will that perception of how well I actually am right now change? And something else that I've talked with my husband about is like, I'm obviously not going to be my 33-year-old self that I was when that was the best I've like felt about my body at that point in time, as far as like physical fitness. And so like, what is the expectation of like, what is healed? Like it's hard to put a finger on like what percentage you actually feel, because it's like, what do you expect 100% to look like for you? I don't know. So that's been like an interesting thing that has, that I've been thinking about a lot since I filled out your questions. But yes, I think that I was, I guess, surprised that I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but there wasn't a lot of information out there about sort of like birth control methods and sort of like for women, because I know that there are a lot of women with Lyme. And yeah, the IUD was what I was doing before. I had issues with hormonal stuff before. So I had been on hormonal stuff since I was 16, taking the pill. Once I got to 30 something, I was like, I've been doing this more than half of my life, and I just didn't feel okay. Like I felt like the hormones. So it's already on this journey of like trying to figure out what else I could do, like what else the options were. And so the copper IUD is what I landed on because it's non-hormonal. And it was a great option for a while. I think I had it for a year or two before we took it out. But yeah, it was just like holding on to bacteria. Basically, it was a place where the bacteria could collect, and I would have like shooting pains. And it was like, oh, well, maybe pulled a muscle, or, like the bacterial infection was deep. It was like up in my cervix. And so it was like sometimes they would do like a pap smear or whatever, and it wasn't testing for anything. So it was like just another one of those things where like nobody believed me that it was like there was something going on. I could tell there was something going on. I could feel it, Yeah, so we took the IUD out, and then at that point in time I was 35. And had been a smoker, like smoke, a cigarette a day, was on my way out of that life, but also that being over 35 and having that history meant that they couldn't give me anything that had estrogen in it. So the doctors are not allowed to, because it increases your risk for cancer. So my only options were progesterone, which was the depot shot, basically. So we did the depot shot, and I asked her, I was like, before, the reason why I had an IUD is because before the hormonal stuff like wasn't working for my system. Like it was, I felt like I was very neutral. Like I wasn't experiencing the downs in life, but I also wasn't experiencing like joy. I was just trying to like have that hormonal balance. And so I was like, are you sure that injecting like multiple months worth of hormones into me at one time is like a good idea? But there was really not. My OBGYN had just quit the practice because she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. So this is a new doctor, and didn't know my history, and also didn't know anything about Lyme, and was kind of like, like whatever, this is, if this isn't what you want to do, we don't have to do it right now. And I was like, well, we have to do something, like, because my husband and I are not trying to have kids right now, and I can't have kids right now because of like Lyme can be transferred, and we're just like trying to be safe. So we did the depot shot in October of I think it's 20. Yeah, anyways, basically, so I didn't have a period for a whole year. So you're supposed to get the depot shot quarterly. You're supposed to go every 3 months. So the like residual effects, it caused a significant like Lyme flare, which I should have known, because that's what I thought was like, if you inject all these hormones that it's going to do that, but it wasn't really like validated at the time. Yeah, and then when I went in, they were like, well, if you're having issues, usually if you're having issues, it means you're bleeding more. So if you're not bleeding at all, then that's, just come back if it doesn't, in like 6 months, if it doesn't like regulate. Sounds like your body's been through a lot, is what she said, with the antibiotics and things like that. So now I'm doing natural cycles, which you can either use that program to get pregnant or to not get pregnant. It tracks your ovulation. You take your temperature every morning. It has been a really great tool for us that has worked. That means it's a non-hormonal thing that I'm on. I don't have the metal in my body anymore, and I still have the option of, of not having children right now, like with this method. So it is more work. You got to take your temperature before you get out of bed every morning. And then it took, I think, about 6 months for it to actually pick up on my like patterns or whatever. And I think that's also because I was coming off of the depot shot. So now that's what I'm doing. So yeah, for any Lyme women out there, I had read this book that was, 300 pages long or whatever, that was about tracking your fertility. And I was just like, I do not have the time to like do all of that every day. So Natural Cycles is like an app, and it sort of tracks that stuff for you. You can input your data, and it helps with the algorithm, like calculate. So that way I didn't have to try to like do all of that myself. So that has been a good natural way, yeah, for me. And hope that at some point, if we decide, we just hadn't decided if we wanted to have children or not. So that's what they were like, your husband should just get a vasectomy. And it's like, we're not there yet, like there's still an option. We still like want the option. And so this was kind of the best way to have that option. Yeah.
So do you feel like your hormonal symptoms around, your menstrual cycle and all those things, have they gotten better, or are they the same? Tell me kind of where you feel like you've come from there. Cause I know a lot of women that's the one thing that they're stuck on with it. That's the one thing I'm stuck on with my Lyme journey, is that I have regular menstrual cycles, but I have extreme pain and I'm down for like a week every month. Mm-hmm. So tell me about like your progress, where you feel like you've come with it.
Yeah, I think that, my symptoms, I do have some symptoms with the hormonal flare, each month now. I mean, just yesterday I had to go in and take a nap after work before we like hung out with our friends or whatever, because it was just like I was exhausted and in pain. So that does happen where, I have cramps and like bloating, and kind of back to natural hormonal swing situations, but it's better than what I was dealing with before. And, I had what we thought was yeast, like a bad yeast infection, but ended up being bacterial or whatever for like 4 months. So that's like, now it just is like, well, it's a few days of like feeling bad, but at least it's not that. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So I do have a swing, and an emotional one too, a few days before the period starts, but it's better than what I was dealing with before. Right. So it's kind of the best of the options that exist out there for me right now.
Yeah, for sure. I'm so glad that you've seen improvement. I think it's so important that we talk about things like this, because I feel like women have this ideal that we're not supposed to talk about those things. Those are like the sicknesses you don't talk about. And that's definitely how I felt growing up and having all these issues. And then realizing that it's okay to talk about these things. And so I think that's really going to help our listeners who are women who suffer from these things to realize that this is like almost normal that women struggle with this. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing your story with that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and I've talked to a friend who has had a baby, and it's like, I was like, I'm just afraid that my body's not going to be able to do that. And we know that right now I'm not in remission yet, and so it's maybe not it's not a right now thing. But she was like, you'll also be surprised at like what it will heal to, like as just like knowing what your body can do, kind of, and like how healing that can be. And so there's potential that that's in our future. We'll see we'll see how Lyme goes, and what we decide, but the business has been our child so far, so.
For sure. Well, that kind of takes me into the next question, talking about like, I think that is in your future. I think you have hope. I think there's always hope for these things to be in the future.
Yeah.
So part of my message from the beginning of when I started my Chronically Beautiful Life blog was to say that I don't like using the term chronically ill. I don't like saying that I'm chronically ill. I like to say I'm chronically beautiful. And then I tell my story. And so I want to hear from you. What about you is chronically beautiful from all of this that you've been through? Obviously, you've had immense suffering in your journey, but there are beautiful things that come out of all of this suffering. So tell me about the beautiful in your life. What have you learned? How have you grown into the person? You talked about how you had an identity crisis, but it seems like you're a lot more solid in your identity now. So tell me about who you are now and what is the beautiful in your journey?
I think just learning to have more grace with myself. Like I'm very understanding and like loving and caring with other people, but that was not really transferred to how I treated myself. And so I think that is part of it, and being open to asking what I actually need, instead of kind of powering through. And I think that talking about it, like, is, if one person can like feel any better by hearing me talk about it, and I think that's why I share about it on social media and stuff, is like, yeah, I've learned so much from others. And that's how it was like in the farming world too. Like we've learned so much from like mentors that now we teach online classes and, speak at conferences and stuff. And so it's like that also happened with the Lyme world, where it's like, I learned so much from other people who were just willing to share that. Yeah, that I hope that me sharing my story can sort of pass that on to the next generation of people who need to hear it. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. I think so many people get that breakthrough when they come through and they realize that there is good, because we can share this now with people, so that now the more people we have sharing our story, the more people are going to hear about it and more people are going to understand, because there's so much misunderstanding about Lyme disease. So I think that's fantastic. So final question, if you could go back to when you were 33 years old and you had no idea what was ahead of you, what would you tell yourself?
To be grateful for the body I was in. Like, I think that's something that I realize now I took for granted, was being able-bodied, and just like knowing that things will change, getting older, but sorry. Because I look back and I didn't know. I definitely took for granted like what my body was capable of. And I think that's why I'm trying to talk about it also in like in the farming world, where it's like, it's a high pressure job and your body depends on you. Is like, that's why it's even more important to talk about like self-care and mental health and stuff, is because otherwise you can push yourself to the edge, and And I think I was doing that. And that's why, like, that was something else that led to being a vulnerability of like why I got so sick, is because I was pushing it to the extreme of, you know, and not sleeping that well and being super stressed and not eating that well, and just like not taking care of myself. And so, yeah, now looking back, if I could tell myself that, of just being like, you know, take a minute for yourself and, you know, go. So try to do like, I've tried to do like on Sundays, go get a massage, or, you know, that's when I would go to the sauna or something. And really like building that into the regular routine of like actually listening to what your body needs.
Well, thank you so much, Gretel. I think you are a beautiful person, and I have loved listening to your story. I've related to a lot of your story. And so really appreciate you coming on here. Matt, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to thank Gretel. Thank you so much. Claire, thank you for being guest co-host here. You were amazing. And I think this is a great friendship that we just formed here. So thank you again for joining the Tick Bootcamp podcast, Gretel.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Gretel Adams. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Gretel, please visit her Instagram page at Flower Farmette. Second, if you enjoyed the episode of Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends on social media. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick Bite blueprint that is inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note, we appreciate any input or improvements you would like to share with us. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, we thank you, our community, for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, on social media, or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews you share with us. Thank you for listening.